Good evening, everyone. We'll be getting started at 5 minutes after the hour. Good evening. We'll get getting started in 5 minutes. We'll be getting started in 3 minutes. Good evening and welcome to the Masonic Seminar Series. My name is Brother Katie Kumsie, and I will be with you for the next hour and a half as we start session 3 of 2025 with Freemasonry and Gnosticism. Just to give you an overview of what we're going to do this evening, we're going to go over a little bit about Masonic Seminar for those who are joining us for the first time. Then we'll talk about the do's and don'ts throughout the lecture, and then we'll get to the presentation itself. So a little bit about the Masonic Seminar Series. It was created in 2018 to help provide and disseminate fundamental knowledge about Freemasonry in general and Universal Co-Masonry in particular. It is created by Universal Co-Masonry and supported by the brothers here at the general office, which are myself, Brother Patrick Alessandro, who is working on X, YouTube, and Facebook, and Brother Benjamin Hartle, who's joining us on Zoom. So thank you to those brothers who are always here every month to help us get the Masonic Seminar Series out to the public. So Masonic Seminar Series is set up to have, it's episodic, or it's an anthology. It's standalone presentations. So if you're joining for the first time and you're worried that you missed last month, don't worry. Those are recorded. They're up on our YouTube channel. You can access them anytime. You can send me an email if you want that link, or you can ask Brother Benjamin or Brother Patrick to send you that link as well. So if you missed last month, don't worry about it. Each presentation is separate and unique because we have people coming into the Masonic Seminar and being interested in joining Freemasonry at all different times throughout the year. So we create it so that way you're not missing anything. And so today we'll be presented, as I said, on Gnosticism. So that's a little bit about Masonic Seminar Series. Let's go to the do's and don'ts. So the difference between the Masonic Seminar Series and our other public group, which is the Masonic Philosophical Society, is that this is a lecture-based seminar. So I will be talking for the next hour and 20 minutes or so, lucky you, about whatever the topic is of the night. So sit back. If you have something to write your notes down, I recommend that. Questions that you might have, I'm always free to answer emails throughout the month if something comes up. I always love hearing your ideas and your thoughts as you kind of get your feet immersed into what Freemasonry is about. My purpose as the presenter is to provide you the things that I have studied over the last 2 decades of being a Freemason and try to help build out that fundamental knowledge of Freemasonry, because many of us feel very called to it, but there's a lot of uncertainty with it. We don't know what it's about. It has secrets. Like, what does that mean? You know, we just don't want to throw ourselves in there without any prior knowledge. So the seminar series is going to help you build that fundamental knowledge without ruining the secrecy of what we do in our meetings. So if you are a Mason coming from another obedience, don't worry, feel free to talk. But if you start talking about things that are, you know, specific to the ritual, I'm going to probably stop you, just because we're very conservative here at Universal Co-Masonry with what we talk about with the public in regards to our rituals. So tonight, with the do's and don'ts, please make sure with the lecture style, I'll stop periodically so that you can ask questions, that you can give your opinion. And a lot of times I like to ask questions to see what you guys think on the topic. That's a great time for our discussion. I do it once or twice throughout the lecture just to kind of break it up and give your mind some time to process what we've been talking about. Please make sure if you have questions that they stay on topic to what we're presenting this evening. Many people are wanting to see a very smooth and steadily presented lecture, and they don't want to see that jumping around, which can be very frustrating. So if you ask a question that's not on point, please don't be offended if I move you to the end of the meeting, where myself and Brother Patrick and Brother Benjamin we'll stay about 5-10 minutes afterwards to address questions like, if you want an application, where is your application at? What's the process of Freemasonry, or anything of that sort. And lastly, please make sure when you have a question or a comment that you use the virtual hand option if you're coming in on Zoom, so that way we can see who you are. And if you're coming on X, YouTube, or Facebook, Brother Patrick will ask your questions for you, since it's hard for you to do that on that platform. All right. Enough of the do's and don'ts. Let's go to the presentation. Before we get into the actual heart of what we're going to talk about with Gnosticism, I want to give some context to why I chose this topic this evening, and it kind of lay it out for the next several months of what my mind's eye sees in regards to the presentations. So I was thinking about what are some fundamental philosophies, concepts, ideas that people need to know that's outside of just the basic, like, you know, what's the difference between Universal Co-Masonry and another obedience, or the all-male organization, or, you know, stuff like that that tends to be more technical, or, you know, landmarks, which I present, those type of things. And I started thinking, because I have the joy to work with inquirers that are international. Brother Rosario works with our domestic inquirers. We have the ability to work with you guys, and we get a lot of the same questions. And so a lot of people really don't understand kind of the birthplace of modern Freemasonry, which is steeped in the Western Esoteric Tradition. And so I thought, well, you know, there's a lot of different philosophies out there that are part of the Western Esoteric Tradition, that if it's someone who is interested in Masonry or is curious about Masonry came to understand, that if they decided to join and become a Mason, they would understand some of the principles and philosophies that are specific to Freemasonry, but kind of have an edge that seems familiar by knowing all these other traditions. So I'm couching our presentation in the Western Esoteric Tradition. Next month is going to be Hermeticism. The month after will be Neoplatonism, and so forth and so on. Don't worry if you miss a month. Again, it's recorded. They're standalone. I'm not going to build off of what I did the month before. So we'll keep it in good faith with how we already set things up. So let me share my screen with you. All right, let's get started. So I'm not going to give a huge in-depth study of Gnosticism. So if you're thinking this is like, you know, 402 class for Gnosticism, it's not. It's not even a 101. It's just a cursory glance at what the main tenets of Gnosticism are and tying it back into its relationship to Freemasonry. So, you know, I thought about going through the cosmology, which is, you know, how do the Gnostics view the creation of the universe? I looked at the creation myth, which we'll talk about shortly with Sophia and Yaldabaoth and whatnot. And we'll talk a little bit about that, but I didn't go into any great detail because, again, I just wanted to give the points of intersection that Gnosticism had with Freemasonry. So we're going to look at just kind of lay the foundation of what the Western esoteric tradition is. If it's something you're not familiar with, this can just kind of help you put some pylons into your foundation to help ground out your ideas. And then, of course, we're going to define what Gnosticism is and look at just the basic brass tacks of what this philosophy is going to be about. Then we're going to talk about not all of the basic tenets. I'll list the ones that are the major ones, but we'll go through a few of them that are relevant to our discussion and aim tonight. And then, of course, in a comparison, we're going to look at how Gnosticism is similar to Freemasonry and how that ties together. So that is where we're going. The Western Esoteric Tradition it's not any one particular philosophy or spiritual tradition. It is a bunch of them. You have Gnosticism, which is Christian mysticism. You have the Egyptian mysticism, which is going to be Hermeticism. And again, that's going to be next month. You have Neoplatonism, which is going to be Greek philosophy. That's going to be Plotinus looking at Plato's theories and evolving them out. I love them all. I think I enjoy Neoplatonism a little bit more than the other two, just because I love Greek philosophy. And so we'll look a little bit about Platonism and what that is, and then we'll build in with Plotinus in a couple months. But Neoplatonism is part of the Western Esoteric Tradition, and so is Freemasonry, again, in its modern form. Freemasonry is created from a time we don't know. I don't know if it's in pre-written history or if it's, something right at the beginning when we started recording. There is no definite date of when Freemasonry was born. And that's why you'll hear Masons say from time immemorial. We don't know when it was made. However, we do have, if we go interpolate backwards and look at, where did Freemasonry, where it is now, how did we get there, we come to the bedrock and the birthplace of Western civilization. So we're looking at Greco-Roman locations, we're looking at Egyptian and whatnot. Even though you won't see a lot of Egyptian influence, just because it tends to be more Western and more Greek and more Roman. So when we look at the idea of the Western esoteric tradition, it's mystical, esoteric, and its occult teachings all wrapped in together with theurgistic practices. Theurgy is a word that means ceremonial magic. And I try to stay away from the word magic, not because I have a problem with the word whatsoever, but in modern times, it tends to be a very kind of hocus pocus, kind of sometimes new age in the negative sense, understanding. So when I say theurgy, don't think about like Houdini. Theurgy is the magic that happens behind ritual, and Freemasonry is ritual. I remember when I first joined in the early 2000s, the head of our order, we were talking and she kept saying, Freemasonry is ritual. It's ritual. It's ritual. I wish people understood that. And it's hard to understand, especially if you don't have a very ritual-based background, what that means. But ritual is extremely important because of that theurgy. You have ritual, which is the kind of the corporeal form, and theurgy is the essence of the ritual. You can kind of think of it that way. So you'll hear me use the word theurgy a lot because I'm referring to ceremonial magic. So when we look at the Western esoteric tradition, they have many parts where they're very different from each other, but they have a lot of shared ground. And I wanted to bring that in to show you why I think it's necessary for us to talk about Gnosticism this evening and the other traditions in the future. So what they share, the Western esoteric traditions, what they share is going to be inner transformation. I think this is where a lot of people get the idea that Freemasonry is about self-improvement, because there is that idea of inner transformation. But self-improvement is a very shallow perspective of it. Like when you say self-improvement and you compare it to inner transformation, the inner transformation has a gravitas to it, a weight to it that is more profound than, making yourself better, making good men better, making women better. So inner transformation is a very heavily loaded phrase, but all of the Western esoteric traditions share that. So we have Gnosticism, again, Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, Freemasonry. You also have the Western esoteric sciences such as Kabbalah, alchemy, astrology, and theurgy. So all of them share that ground of inner transformation, which that could be a whole year of discussion, looking at how each one of these traditions, Freemasonry included, really come to understand what inner transformation is and how to achieve it. And Freemasonry is about inner transformation. It's a byproduct and not the focus. Like in alchemy, that is the focus, is to transform from the mundane into the spiritual. In Freemasonry, the work that we do is for the betterment of all, and in the process, we experience that inner transformation. So it's a slightly different viewpoint, but still shared idea. All of the Western esoteric traditions believe in hidden knowledge or occult knowledge, OCCULT, occult knowledge. Hidden knowledge, knowledge that's just not laying on the surface for anyone in the world to pick up and process and to gestate over. It's hidden. So I love this picture that I have up. To me, it looks like someone searching, someone who's measuring and searching and trying to understand the world. And hidden knowledge isn't something that is intellectual. And what I mean by that, not that Freemasonry is not intellectual, because it is, it's more cerebral, but it's not just knowing facts. Like, this is what gravity is, this is the, universal constant, it's not like that. It's knowledge that transcends the practical knowledge of today, that it's something that comes, and it's hard to communicate because it's almost ineffable. I can't tell you the hidden knowledge. And that's the beauty. That's why in Freemasonry, you have transmission. Transmission means from master to student. And it's not something that's specifically unique to Freemasonry. There's other obediences that are not obediences, other traditions that have transmission, but Freemasonry specifically has from mouth to ear. And that means that we are trying to help each other get the tools to mine out that hidden knowledge, but I cannot tell you what the hidden knowledge is. You have to experience what that is, and you have to uncover it yourself. And that's actually, we'll talk a little bit about that with Gnosticism this evening. And last but not least, that all of these traditions share the idea that it's not just the material world that we exist in. That behind it, there is a blueprint, there's a spiritual world that encases and is imbued throughout the material world. And that is, it is accessible, which I think is an interesting way to put it, because sometimes we think certain things are inaccessible, that we can't access them. And in the Western esoteric traditions, it takes a lot of work. It takes a lifetime of dedication and perseverance, but you can access it, but you cannot necessarily communicate it to others, which is a beautiful way of doing it, because it means that each person who seeks, like all of us here, who seeks for something higher, something that's transcendent over the profane experience of life, that we can access something that's more. So for someone who's, every once in a while I'll get an inquiry that's looking into Freemasonry. So someone who's looking to become a Mason, they'll say, I'm an atheist in the new sense of the word, not the old sense. I'm an atheist and I don't believe that there's anything beyond the material. I'm an empiricist. I would say Freemasonry is not for you, at least not universal Co-Masonry, because there's definitely that idea, that principle, that philosophy, that foundation, that there's a spiritual world that all of us can access if we do the work. So all of these tie in together and bring these traditions into that Western esoteric tradition that comes out of Greek, Roman, and Egyptian influences. Just to give you some time period, not to give you a history lesson, I'm not going to go through all of them, but roughly there's about 4 different time periods throughout the Western esoteric tradition. But keep in mind, it's not linear. There's not one like fluid movement. But you can see, like with Freemasonry, and I'll use that because that's why we're here. You have the ancient period, which is going to be before, through 3rd century BC, and then you have all the way up through the about 400s AD. That's where you're going to see the Egyptian mysticism, the Greek philosophic influence, the I said Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Roman, you have like Mithras and Orpheus, you have all of those that are coming in. Now, Freemasonry, there's a lot of reference to the building guilds, that's going to be an influence that comes in the medieval era or the Middle Ages, which is going to be from that 5th to 15th century. And that's where you see that, Masons wear aprons, we have working tools, we do these things that we're builders, and we clear foundations and we raise edifices. And it can be physical if you're a stonemason, or it can be spiritual if you're a speculative Mason. But that's where Freemasonry moves from the ancient bedrock of ancient mystery religions into the building guilds and the stone guilds and whatnot. And again, we could talk about that in a whole different lecture, where you have men and women on the gilding rosters back, I think, in 1900s. I don't remember if it's the Halliwell manuscript. I don't want to quote myself and get it wrong, but we have records of that. And that's where you'll see that influence coming in addition to all the influences of Orpheus, Mithras, the Pythagorean schools, Plato, whatnot. That moves, all those traditions move into the Renaissance. Some of them are going to be kind of squashed, and I think it's 386, correct me if I'm wrong, Brother Patrick, 386, Theodosius II quashes all non-Christian traditions, and you'll see a lot of them will either go underground or some of them get wiped out, which Gnosticism, unfortunately, is more of a casualty than an underground current, although there are some people today who do practice Gnosticism, but it's not as flourishing as maybe Freemasonry would be. So you have the medieval period where you see the building guilds. Then you get into the Renaissance, which again means rebirth. We're seeing a reintroduction of Greco-Roman ideas. You'll see that the invisible colleges come up. Freemasonry is going to pick that up, that invisible college where you have all sorts of people coming from all sorts of backgrounds into the lodge space, where they can talk about all the different ideas, and religion and politics and anything that's divisive isn't going to come in and divide. Not that you can't talk about those things, they're just not going to be used as a divisive force. They're going to be something that helps to build out our understanding. So you have the Renaissance, you see the introduction of the 7 liberal arts into Masonic education, that comes from that period. And then you move from the Renaissance through the Enlightenment up into the modern times, which is going to be about 1600s into the present. Again, Freemasonry is going to evolve through that point, and you'll see a lot of different types of Masonry. You have atheistic, you have religious, you have Christian, you have all sorts of different ones. You have many different splinterings that is going to be a repercussion of just modern times and modern pressures. So that's just the time period. And you could go through that with each of the traditions, but I think it's more important we just talk about Freemasonry. But that goes further back. Freemasonry goes further back than the 3rd century BC. We just don't necessarily have the records to show, this is the pinpoint. So it's from time immemorial. So we're gonna get to what is Gnosticism, and then I just want to check my time, see where we're at. We're gonna stop and just have a quick discussion, check in, see if there's any questions, and then we'll move forward. So what is Gnosticism? It's interesting because Gnosticism, some people, like when I first came into the understanding of Gnosticism, I just use it kind of like a blanket term, like a Christian, a Gnostic, like Gnosticism isn't any one particular group or idea. It's actually a conglomeration of many different interpretations of Christian philosophy infused with Greek, Christian spirituality infused with Greek philosophy. So you're going to see a lot of different ideas. There's a lot of different books like the Gospel of Thomas and whatnot that are not Gnostic texts. But what we do know of Gnosticism as a collective is going to come from the Nag Hammadi find in 1945, where we had all of these scrolls that gave us information about Gnosticism. And then, as is the case with the Druids, we don't know, the Druids didn't write anything down, up in the Celtic area. They didn't write anything down. So how do we know about them? Well, it's because we hear it from people who are anti-writers. And unfortunately, Gnosticism is the same way. We have early church fathers, Christian writers who denounced Gnosticism, and in their writings, like heresies and whatnot, we have learned through their perspective what Gnostics believe. So there is a shade of negative on what we understand because the writer was giving a negative perspective. So those are the two main sources that we know Gnostics by. But there are many different interpretations. So I'm just going to look at the general kind of overview. Obviously, there's going to be different sects that are going to kind of poke out in different ways. The word Gnosticism comes from the word gnosis. Gnosis means one who has knowledge, or it has been shortened to mean just knowledge. But I want to throw a caveat or a clarifier in there that it's not just knowledge. Again, it's not profane, factual, corporeal knowledge. It is mystical, occult, hidden, in some ways inaccessible to everyone knowledge. It's esoteric, so it means to be hidden. So when someone says they need to achieve gnosis, it means something, but it's not just like they need to have knowledge. They need to go to school, become literate in reading, writing, and mathematics. They're not talking about that type. So when we talk about gnosis, anytime I say that word, think spiritual, transcendent knowledge. That would probably be a better interpretation than just knowledge as we know today. Again, I was talking about how we know a lot about the Gnostics, or what information we have about the Gnostics. It's again from early anti-Gnostic writers, early church figures. And what happened was the Greek philosophers used to use gnosis in their writings, and it was a positive, it was positive. It was talking about knowledge and one who has knowledge, that specific type of knowledge. But the early writers who wrote against Gnosticism changed the word Gnostic into a pejorative. So it became a negative word. So it was kind of like a slanderous word, Gnostic. It wasn't very nice. And so the word Gnostic came to mean anyone who didn't believe with early church orthodox teachings. So it was people who tended to be more mystical, who looked at things more metaphorically. They were called this pejorative. Today, it's not a pejorative. I think it's gone back into being more of a spiritual word than anything. So we're going to stop here because the next step is we're going to look at the basic tenets. I want to see if there's any questions or comments about what we're presenting this evening before we move forward. So the floor is open. If you have any questions or comments, please raise your hand virtually or put it in the chat, and Brother Patrick or Brother Benjamin will ask your question for you.
Nothing specific at the moment.
Okay. And Brother Benjamin, do we have any questions?
We do not.
Okay. I guess you guys just like to hear me talk. So be it. We'll move forward.
Jason still interested.
Ah, Jason. We can't hear you. Hold on. It might be me. Just Brother Patrick's going to check the IT here.
Let me just.
Hello, Brother Patrick.
Hello, hello. 'Tis I.
Sometimes
Yep.
it's me. It's always me. All right, Jason, try me again. Hold on. Do you want to turn up the volume on that? Because you guys can hear Jason, right? Oh, no, so it's not me. Jason, I don't think anyone can hear you.
Can you hear
So
me
maybe
now?
if you want to put your
We can hear him.
Can you hear me now?
Oh yeah. Hello.
Yeah, it's my headphones. I have my
Okay.
headphones in. So, so Gnosticism, if I'm saying it right, it's basically a religion. No, I mean, it's not a religion. It's basically the belief of everything, and you can't go wrong with it, though, from what I'm understanding, right? Because you're just believing in the whole in a God of everything. I mean, I don't see how you get. I don't see. I mean, I don't see why people would. Hold on one second. I don't see why people would have gone and made it into something that was never meant to be, as far as a bad. If I'm understanding it correctly.
Okay, great question. Excuse me. So when we look at this, there's definitely things that you have to believe in order to consider yourself a Gnostic. It's not just kind of like whatever you believe in is Gnosticism. Gnosticism in a very broad stroke is Christian mysticism. So if you don't subscribe to anything that's Christian, it would be really hard not to, can't say you're really a Gnostic. It's like me saying I'm a Sufi, but I don't believe in the 5 pillars of Islam. Like that doesn't work. So you have to believe, and we'll go through those tenets. You have to believe certain things in order to call yourself a Gnostic. So when we look at the early writers, Christian writers that said, you're a Gnostic as a pejorative, it's because the people who they were calling Gnostics were people who did not agree with church orthodoxy, like, for example, that Jesus is the divine savior. they didn't believe that necessarily. I mean, you had some Gnostics who might have, but not on the whole. Most of them, they believed in Jesus. It wasn't that they didn't believe in him. They just took an entirely different metaphorical or allegorical or just a completely different interpretation. And so that removed them from the camp of orthodoxy. Like, you can't say, it's like saying, you know, I can be a Christian, but I don't believe in Jesus. Well, that doesn't really work. So it's not a one for all thing. You can't just believe whatever you want and still be Gnostic. So that's a very good question to ask, because I want to make sure that we understand that they had very core beliefs that you had to accept as truth in order to call yourself a Gnostic. The difference is that when you get into things like, especially like with Freemasonry, you know, we can sit here, the three of us in the studio, and talk about, you know, a symbol, and the three of us will give three different opinions, and I might be less right than them because they may know more about that symbol, or vice versa. The thing is when you start getting into, when you speculate and you discuss and you try to understand something that's abstract, when you do a lot of abstraction, it gets into a really hard way to measure who's right and who's wrong, because it's a lot of speculation. So my point being that when you do Gnosticism and you start to interpret Christian teachings or Greek philosophy in such a way that is outside the norm, it's really hard to put that in container and say, well, that's measurable, because you're going beyond the form into the essence of a thing. So very long way to answer your question, but no, there's specific things you have to believe in. Perfect. All right. Moving forward. All right. All right. So basic tenets, like I said, we're not going to cover all of them, but we are going to cover quite a few, just because some of them, I think, kind of go out of the scope of what we're looking at. So one of the core tenets is dualism, and I'll go through at least a brief definition of both of them, or all of these rather. Dualism, the demiurge, Yaldabaoth is his name, the divine spark, which I think is extremely important, divine sparks. Salvation through gnosis, Jesus as an emissary. So this is the difference of Jesus the Messiah versus Jesus as a divine emissary. They're very different. Remember, the Messiah is going to be someone who is trying to save, it's salvific. It's someone who's trying to provide a salvation to her people. Again, there's that rejection of Christian orthodoxy and occult knowledge or hidden knowledge. So these are the basic tenets. Now, again, for someone who may be very knowledgeable about Gnosticism, they're going to be like, there's way more than this. And there is, but these are the kind of the core tenets that allow someone to really identify, kind of like the buoys in the spiritual water that said, this space here, if you fall in it, you're a Gnostic. So let's talk about dualism. So this is something that Freemasonry does share quite a bit of, they intersect quite a bit. Dualism is the belief in the binary forces of light and dark. Now, in Gnosticism, they do use the word evil, but it's more in line with you have the darkness, and that is evil, versus, you know, evil and good being the main categories. So there is the belief that there is a struggle. There's two forces that are in constant fight with one another, and that is the spiritual realm and materiality. So the physical and the spiritual. That is dualism. Now, there are some Masonic obediences that are not dualistic. They can be, you know, theistic, where they believe in a God, a Christian God or a Jewish God, something of that sort. In Freemasonry, for Universal Co-Masonry, the organization I represent, there is dualism, there is deism, and depending on your own personal belief, there might be some theism in there as well. And let me just break that apart. So in Masonry, we do understand that there's a war between the forces of light and the forces of dark. Freemason, if you bring it down into its etymological roots, there's a couple of different ideas of where that idea came from of Freemason and what it means, but it means warriors of the light or sons of light. And when we use the word sons, it's not saying male only, it's talking about humankind. It's talking a title. So it's not talking about a particular sex. But there's the warriors of the light. And our job is to help disseminate and push back the darkness. in Universal Co-Masonry, we talk about how the darkness is presented in the form of ignorance. And we'll see that word show up when we talk about Yaldabaoth, the demiurge. Ignorance is the darkness. And we all have ignorance, every one of us. And it comes in different forms and it comes in different styles. Some of us are more ignorant than others, right? We're not all the same. Some are less than. And it just depends on what we're talking about. So that ignorance is what we're constantly fighting against. So one of our tools, to put it on a practical note, one of our tools is to create, Masonic Philosophical Society, the Masonic Seminar. We have lectures throughout the year at different places to help disseminate information that dispels ignorance about Freemasonry, about esoteric and occult teachings, the perennial faith, those type of things. We are trying to dispel it. We also are trying to fight against the darknesses of hate, fanaticism, ambition, the tyranny of those. They're something that not only do we have to fight within ourselves, there's that inner fight, but we also present outwardly in the world trying to break that up. An example of that that's practical again is, I had mentioned this before in another seminar, is that during COVID, when everyone was locked down, there was a lot of vitriol on social platforms. And as Masons, and I firmly believe this, our job was to help break down that vitriol, to help build bridges instead of moats between people that otherwise, were in constant conflict. That's a very practical thing of saying, like, hey, it's not that you're both right or you're both wrong. Like, there's just another way to have this dialogue. This isn't the way to do it. And it's a dialogue that can be very constructive to both sides. Even if we walk away thinking the other person is completely wrong, that's fine. But there's a way to dispel the ignorance of fanaticism and hate and ambition without trying to destroy the other person. That's our job in Masonry. That's one of them. And I think, in my opinion, when we look at the aim of Universal Co-Masonry, which is to the glory of the great architect of the universe, which is our name for the creative force, whatever you want to call that creative force, God or Yahweh or whatever. And it's to the perfecting of humanity. Perfecting of humanity is going to take warriors, because you can't just sit idly against the dark, because the dark is a much stronger force. If you look just at science and you look at negative energy versus positive energy, negative, it's a lot easier to tear down than it is to build up. That potential energy, that storage is easy to rip down, and then to put, you take the idea of cleaning your house. It's a lot easier to destroy your house and make it messy than it is to keep it clean. And that is an example of darkness versus light on a very rudimentary level, where you have the darkness. If you just sit there and do nothing, it will always win. But we as Masons are always trying to do something, whether it's, keeping our own spiritual studies alive, as well as helping other people in whatever form. That's dualism. Deism is going to be that idea where you have the great architect is going to put everything in motion and kind of take a step back and let things happen. Freemasonry doesn't say, like, yes, that's what the great architect is, but there is a lot of that kind of like, well, the great architect created all of this. How he or she or it or the interacts with it, we don't know. So it kind of defaults into a more like that entity or that idea just lets things happen. Now, we have many brothers who are theistic, and they believe that there is either an anthropomorphical figure, someone who is a being that is more interactive, and that is completely fine as well. There's no one way you have to see it. But in Masonry, we see that in Gnosticism, that there's that dualism, and that they do believe in, they're theistic. They believe in the true God is what they call it. So that's dualism. When we look at the demiurge, this one's really interesting. There we go. So this goes into the creation myth. And again, I'm just going to do a very broad stroke on the creation myth, because you can spend a lot of time studying it and trying to parse it out. But so you have the true God, which is the creating God, the God that creates everything. And he creates what's called aeons. And aeons are assisting. They're part of the spiritual hierarchy that's in Gnosticism. And they assist, and they're the true God in whatever the true God needs. And of the aeons is Sophia. And Sophia means wisdom. right? So Sophia decided at some point that she wanted to create something without the consent of the true God, who is the creator. And through this choice and this action of trying to create, she falls from pleroma, which is the realm of fullness. It's like, I guess you could say God lives, but it is the realm of the spiritual. She falls from it. And in doing so, she creates Yaldabaoth, which is the demiurge. So when I say the demiurge or Yaldabaoth, I'm interchanging them. And this demiurge proceeds to start to create the material world. But I told you the word ignorant would show back up, and here it is. So Yaldabaoth thinks he is the supreme God, that there is no one higher than him. He's not aware of the true God and his aeons. And so he is ignorant about who he really is in the grand scheme of the hierarchy, the spiritual hierarchy. And so he creates the material world according to Gnostic teachings and writings. But this world, because he is not the true creator, the true God, is inherently flawed and corrupt. And that's because it's an interesting idea if you think about it. Yaldabaoth is creating from ignorance because he doesn't know who he really is. Now, when Sophia fell from pleroma, when she fell from the realm of fullness, she kept within her the divine spark that came from the true God. And when she gave birth to Yaldabaoth, that spark came through. Now, Yaldabaoth not only created the material world, but also created humans. And humans, this is the interesting thing, that humans somehow, in some way, received the divine spark from Yaldabaoth. And so Yaldabaoth so that's kind of like the lineage of the divine spark. Yaldabaoth, though, he created archons, and archons are negative to the aeons. So the aeons are kind of like, you can think of it like angels of light, though they don't call them angels. And the archons are going to be those that serve the dark, or Yaldabaoth. And so the archons in Gnostic tradition are here to trip us up, to get us to sink into our base nature. Not only is Yaldabaoth ignorant, but he's also malevolent. He is not this idea, like in the New Testament, where you have this idea, this all-loving God. He is not that individual. Some Gnostic teachings put it back to the demiurge being the God of the Tanakh or the Old Testament, where very vengeful, very, very aggressive. Though not all Gnostics believe that. That's just some of the sects believed in that was the God who created. And it was Yaldabaoth and Gnostic teachings that created Adam and Eve. So you kind of see two different fall of man, because you have the fall of Sophia, which is wisdom falling out of the realm of fullness into material, and then you have the creation of Adam and Eve, and then the serpent, which in Gnostic teaching, the serpent isn't evil like it is in traditional Christian teachings. It is a symbol of wisdom, and it is through the serpent that Eve is given the knowledge that she needs to in order to create what we have here today. And that wisdom is going through the divine feminine into the divine masculine. And that's kind of that creation myth, and that's the demiurge. So the demiurge in Gnostic tradition is not a very pleasant human being. It is very malevolent and very vengeful. He's trying to constantly trip up each human being. Now, the interesting thing is that Gnostics believe that the material world is inherently evil. Like I said, they didn't make good and evil the main categories. It's kind of like a subcategory of darkness. You have ignorance and you have evil. And the Gnostics are very different from the other Western esoteric traditions in that they really do believe matter is very, very evil. Now, in Freemasonry, it's not so much that we believe that matter, the form, is vile and evil and corrupt. It's more of an understanding that the matter gets in the way of the spiritual. So that it's not the same. I mean, maybe some brothers might believe that matter is evil, and that's fine. But on the whole, there's more of an idea that matter is there to be subjugated by the spiritual. But if it is not, then it can easily easily overcome the spirit, and then that becomes where we get corrupt forms and passions and people living their base nature. So that's probably one of the big takeaways a lot of people take from Gnosticism, is that the material realm is actually considered very evil. The prison house of flesh, it's something that blocks us in. So I talked about the divine spark. Now, I shouldn't say every person. So if I could go back and correct my slide, I would just say some people have the true, like a piece of true God trapped within their bodies. Not everyone has that. And I'll talk about where that comes from. I told you that, how we each have a divine spark, that creation myth with Sophia and the archons. That's kind of the same thing. But here we'll see that the divine spark is not in every single person. And I think this is a fascinating, fascinating idea. And the reason being that, excuse me, the reason being is that, oftentimes I've heard a lot over the years where we look around the world, like, let's say you're sitting at a cafe and you're, just drinking your coffee and you're watching, the world go by. And you just look at it and you're like, because I've done this myself, I'm like, I wonder how many people are actually thinking about something that is productive. Not like, what do I need to do when I get home? I need to get this project at work done. I need to go work out. Not like that, but like true productive spiritual conversation. And it's not so much like I'm judging. I'm like, oh, Patrick is, but not Benjamin, or vice versa. So, it's not like that. It's more like, do they have a conversation about the spiritual realm? And I don't know if everyone does. And I'm not saying that I know that with certainty, because sometimes I just look at people's lives, actions are, words in motion and beliefs in motion, where I'm just like, well, do they think, do they want to get out of this place, or are they just really happy to be stuck in modernity and materiality? And it kind of goes into that Gnostic idea of, well, then does everyone have a divine spark? Personally, this is my personal opinion, so I'm going to hang that up on, the lecture on the wall and just say, I do think everyone has a divine spark. Now, whether or not they access it, that's a different story. But in Gnosticism, get my opinion aside, Gnosticism, not everyone has it. It's only those who are capable of achieving gnosis. Those are the people that are given the divine spark. How that is divvied out in a Gnostic belief, I have no idea. But when we look at this, gnosis is extremely important, and this goes into salvation, which we'll talk about here shortly. But when we look at it, it's not everyone has a divine spark. And I find that very alien, because to me, when I look at people, even the people that frustrate me, I'm like, I know they have virtue. I may not see it, but I know they have it. I know they have a divine spark. Like, they're all from the source. And in Freemasonry, that tends to be more of the idea that, that everyone has the capability, that there's that equality of opportunity, but not everyone seizes that capability. All right, so when we look at salvation, this is a really interesting one, because back when I first became a Mason and I really started studying, and trying to understand what Freemasonry is, and I'll tell you, there, outside of the Victorian writers, there's really not any great modern writers on Freemasonry. They tend to be really dry historical books. Not that history is not important, it's just like after the fifth book, you kind of wanted something different, But when you look at salvation, when I was first a Mason, I really just kind of thought, like, Masonry doesn't have salvation. It's not a salvific order. It's not something that makes you, you need to be saved. Because again, in our Judeo-Christian world, especially Christian mentality, it doesn't matter if we're Christian or not in practice, because the whole Western civilization is infused with Christian theology, like every life is important. But when we look at it, I think his salvation is like, someone died for me, and then I, to save me because I can't save myself. And Masonry is not like that at all. Now, when we look at salvation from a Gnostic standpoint, it's not like that either. Salvation is achieved when one has gained a spiritual understanding of their divine origin. That is very Masonic. That's something they share a lot about. If I were to say, someone were to ask me, like, what does Freemasonry really do? It helps, to kind of go back to Plato, it's recognition. It's to help to remind you where you came from. And it's not like I was born in this state, this country, this, city. It's we all have a divine origin. And that's why I personally think that the divine spark is in everyone, because we all have a divine origin. Although that's not Gnostic in its belief. But we all have a divine noble heritage that we have forgotten, and that in this life we are trying to remember, or the multiple lives, if you believe in reincarnation, that we're trying to remember. And once we understand that in the Gnostic sense, that there is a divine origin, then our goal is, through that understanding, to go back to pleroma, I always mess that word up, pleroma, to that realm of fullness, to be with the true God. That is going to be how one is saved through Gnosis. Salvation is coming through divine wisdom, through a wisdom of understanding. And I'm going to stop here in a second. So if you have questions or comments, please get them ready. So when we look at salvation in Gnostic understanding, it wasn't that Jesus died on the cross and that through his redemption we are saved. It's more of, do your duty in a spiritual sense, come to really, and when I say no, I mean truly grok the understanding of heritage. Where did you come from? Where did Sophia fall from? What does it to mean to be with the true God? What does it mean that everything in this material world is an illusion created by a false God? And when we look at that, and we come to understand that that is going to be the salvation the Gnostics were teaching. And you can see now, more clearly maybe than in most places, how the early church writers really thought this was a heretical teaching, that you didn't have to go through Jesus in the Christian sense to be saved. You could actually find, and should find, God, the true God, on your own through a mystic experience. And I do want to just clarify, when I say the word mystic and occult, they do mean different things. Mystic means it's a direct communication. I like to call it a divine download, if you will, where you and the higher source are in direct communication one with the other. Occult is that you're going to try to find the true God through study, which there's nothing wrong with study at all, but it's going to take a longer way, and it's going to be a different path, and it's going to possibly go through other individuals, whether you believe in gurus or popes or prophets or ascended masters, something like that. That's going to be more in line with the occult. So I'm going to stop here before we get to the next slide and see if there's any comments or questions, and before we proceed forward.
Also, if you can issue an apology, there's a troll on here trying to post some inappropriate stuff. I'm banning them as fast as I can.
Okay, so Brother Benjamin just wanted me to announce that there's someone in here who's just trying to post some inappropriate stuff, and we're working to get them out of the Zoom. So if you see anything that's not supposed to be there, it's not supposed to be there, and we're trying to ban them as quick as possible. So, all right, let's go with Marcus, and then Patrick, let me know, Brother Patrick, if there's anyone that has questions. Marcus, you have a question or a comment?
Back to the gnosis, the idea of gnosis, and then moving to a true God. So I want to ask dimensional, like spiritual dimensional. I had something written down here. The micro, macro, and like the idea of Gaia. How does that all wrap in together? Thank you.
How does the macro, micro, and Gaia wrap into? Give me a little bit more, Marcus, because I don't think I'm fully understanding your question. And I want to make sure I answer it correctly.
Excuse me, I was saying, so the idea of dimensional, or the true idea of so what gnosis would be with the knowledge of micro, macro.
Oh, I see.
Moving dimensionally, excuse me.
So I think I understand your question, Marcus. Please direct me if I did not answer your question here. So understanding, and this is something we'll talk a lot about with Hermeticism when we look at micro, macro, as above, so below, as within, as without. One of the things that Freemasonry really tries to focus on is to increase one's awareness or consciousness, to elevate us to a higher understanding. And when we look at that, to use Marcus's words, like a dimensionality, we're trying to see things from a different perspective, possibly from more of a spiritual perspective, that that allows us to see things more clearly. So sometimes, like, again, when I'm at a cafe and I have a time just to sit down and take my coffee and watch, like, I try to look at things differently than just the hustle and bustle of what's ever happening in the cafe. Like, you know, how does this, like, what am I looking at? Is this cells in the body? Is this the like spiritual hierarchy? Like, how all this ties together. And when one can have a contiguity between all of their micro, macro, the world, the universe, when they can tie everything together through space and time, there's awareness that comes with that elevates them higher and higher. And I think as one, you know, in Masonry, we do that elevation of consciousness through degrees. We all have different degrees, and we work through the degrees, which is different rituals, and those rituals help build within us a better understanding to see things differently. I definitely see things very different than when I first joined. And the process of just watching my perspective and understanding change through the last 2 decades has been really interesting, because I don't think I would have ever gotten where I am now if I hadn't. Like, it's just a process. And so when we look at how everything connects, everything is connected. And Masonry asserts that everything, there is an objective reality of us share into. And in that objective reality, there is many dimensions. Last month, we talked about the composition of man and how man isn't just one 3-dimensional figure. There is many different bodies within man. That's an idea of how faceted. And I think, Marcus, I hope I answered your question, that it all comes together through an awareness. And Gnosis is that awareness. Once you understand how everything ties together, then it is a lot easier to navigate both the spiritual and physical realms. An example I would give, whether or not you are a Christian, I think it still applies, but like a lot of people struggle who are, you know, like, I don't know about Christianity. They're like, I don't know, did Jesus really walk on water? To me, I'm like, I don't think it matters if he did or didn't, but I think there's a principle there that if he did walk on water, it wasn't that he defied the principles of the world and of the universe, it's that he understood them and knew how to use them. And I think that's a metaphor for what we're trying to do in Masonry, is to understand the principles to help do great good in this world. And that is done through connecting everything through the different that are in different dimensions in different places, above, below, into one unified understanding, which I believe the Gnostics would call Gnosis. So Marcus, I hope I got your question and I got that answered. All right, Eli, it's good to see you again.
Okay, I have just a brief comment that may be a topic for a future conversation, and it is a linguistic comment. Very often, I heard many times saying the word salvation, and the word salvation, so Christianity is based on the Jewish tradition, and in Hebrew there is a word, Geulah, and Geulah means redemption. So could be kind of equivalent, but redemption means to be free from the chains of ignorance, from the chains of slavery. And as I said before, I think it could be an interesting discussion topic for another time. So the thing is, the summary is, the word Geulah means redemption. And so comparing the meaning of salvation, that you are saved from hell or something like that, versus redemption, freedom, as you said, is like to eliminate the ignorance, to eliminate the all those kind of things. So thank you.
Thank you, Brother Eli. I do want to say it's interesting because one of my side hobbies is that we have, with Universal Co-Masonry, we have a children's organization called the Order of the Knights of the Round Table, of which actually the 3 of us are a part of. And, I study a lot of Arthurian legend to better understand more about the teachings of knighthood. And redemption has come up, obviously, a lot of knights trying to be redeemed. And does that tie into salvation? And Freemasonry, it's no secret that there is, correlation to knighthood, whether it's the Knight Templars or the Knights of the Rose Croix, the 18th degree. Like, there's a lot of knights speak in there, and redemption. And, I don't think a lot of people like the idea of redemption or salvation if they tend not to be a very religious individual, because it sounds like I need someone or I did something wrong. And I don't think there's anything bad in saying, I need help to get to where I'm going. And in Masonry, redemption is definitely something that's there, but it's not in the same sense of, like the idea of Christianity. And I only say that just because that's something that most people understand. Redemption is that idea of falling from the source, that we're trying to redeem our fallen state from the source, going back into the source by being redeemed. How you get there, how that redemption occurs, as Brother Eli said, is a very different conversation. But you see that leitmotif of descend, ascend a lot in Freemasonry. And again, in the Western Esoteric traditions, you're seeing a lot of that fallen state coming back into a redeemed state. I have to say my understanding of original sin in the Christian context has changed a lot, from the idea of the literal, Adam and Eve leaving the garden, in coming into the world of knowledge, to the idea that man fell from the source and is trying to go back into that place. And it is done through redemption. Some people believe it's by salvation. Again, that's a different conversation. But thank you, Brother Eli, for bringing that up. Let's go to Edward, and then we'll go to Jason.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
I wanted to let you know a little bit about Gnosis, or the word Gnosis. Actually, if you go to the etymology of the word, it means the man who sings. So that is the one who sings, from the ancient Greek, which is not today Greek, but it's ancient Greek. So the whole tradition and the whole ceremonies were from, like you said, from mouth to ear. There was someone who would sing the story and the people around would hear through a ceremony. Through that, the word epos actually is the narrator calls the muse to tell the story, and the story starts with epos, which means simply, here we go. So the whole epos is told, here we go, and the story starts. And the way I see it, the whole knowledge comes through meanings, with time, with a lot of knowledge that comes from ancient Sumers to the whatever Plato got information when he was in the Eastern countries, and then he came back to Greece, and then he gave his information and tried to really start a movement through the religion and state, which would put people, in control, let's say. And from there, the whole knowledge started. I just wanted to clarify this.
Thank you, Edward. I think that's actually very beautiful imagery, what you said there in the beginning. Very, very kind of you to share that with us. Thank you. Jason, you got your hand raised, and then to Fatima afterwards.
Yeah, thank you, Edward, because I think you answered my question. Because I was going to ask, because John Milton put out the book Paradise Lost, and I was wondering if we could have the best of both worlds, still be what we call a Christian, but at the same time have that Gnostic look at things. Because after he wrote Paradise Lost, he wrote Paradise Regained. I didn't know that, but one of my students told me that, because I got that book and I started reading it, and then I was like, whoa. Ended up thinking twice about it and kind of got rid of it. But one of my students said, hey, man, you got to read that. And he said that he wrote Paradise Regained. I looked at that one yet, didn't know anything about it. But I was wondering if, as a Mason, could you have the best of both worlds? As a kind of get like a Gnostic look at things and a Christian look at things?
Thank you, Jason. to your question, can you have the best of both worlds? Well, I don't know if I see it the same way. To me, it's like if you're going to be Gnostic and you're like in a genuine Gnostic believer, then you have to be Christian. So you like, I guess, yes, you would have the best of both worlds, because in order to have one, it's predicated on the other. But in the whole of like, when you look at like dualism, I don't think, and this isn't, you didn't ask this question, but like with dualism, with the light and the dark, I don't think you can have the best of either one. In Gnosticism, you definitely are trying for the light. But in order to be Gnostic, you will see when we talk about Jesus as an emissary next, the Gnostics were around before Jesus, but they weren't called Gnostics. And then they brought in the idea of Jesus into their teachings, and then they became a Christian mysticism. It wasn't born a Christian mysticism, which I always thought was very interesting, because in my early studies, I always thought like Gnosticism came on the scene after Christianity did, but it didn't. It was reversed. So yes, Jason, to your point, because one is predicated on the other, yes, you can have best of both worlds in that sense, that in order to be a Gnostic, you have to be a Christian. And I just got a text asking, how do you raise your hand? Depends on your device. I usually find it under participants. Is that where you raise your hand?
Reactions.
Reactions. Go to reactions on your device and you will find a little hand raise, and that will allow you to raise your hand. All right, Fatima, you're next.
Hello, Brother Katie.
Hello.
I wanted to ask you, focusing on what you spoke about duality. And when I hear duality, I think of yin and yang. Now, I've been following some Eastern philosophies where I read that polarity and duality are traits of the material world. And if there is an absolute reality, as they call it, it's the dissolution of duality and this absolute oneness. And I wanted to ask you, since Freemasonry believes in this objective truth, does the state of objective truth dissolve duality?
What a beautiful question, Fatima. Thank you for asking that. Yes, when we look at the idea of how man came to be, one concept in Masonry is again, that fallen idea where man fell from the source. Another way of saying that is the monad, that from the monad came the duad and the triad and the so forth and so on. You get the tetatris, which is the 1, the 2, the 3, and the 4 kind of pyramid, the smaller tetatris, if you want to look it up. But as man went down from the monad, they broke from the source, you do have the birth of duality and polarity, which again, we'll talk a lot with Hermeticism next month about what that means, because they are perspectives of the material. So an example is the measurement of energy. And when you look at how energy always flows from hot to cold, or more energy to less energy, right? So if you have two containers and one has less energy and they're connected, you'll see that the molecules will move in a more energetic state into that container that has less. So it's a perspective, like it's a measurement of temperature. That's the objective reality, Fatima, is that there's the measurement of the kinetic energy of a system. And then you can say the perspective is that it has a lot, so it's hot, or it has a little, which is cold, and oversimplifying it because there's pressure and stuff that's involved in it, but that's neither here or there. So when you have the idea of falling down, when you ascend back to the source, you are unifying everything together. It's like the unified field theory. You're bringing all the principles that you understand into one massive understanding until you get into objective reality. That's one Mason who was near and dear to my heart. He would talk about, and still talks about, how you have a pendulum, right? So you have the polarity, which is going to, swing back and forth, but it's on the same string and it's on the same range. So again, you can say it's energy, it's emotion, whatever you want to use. What the Mason does, and when we first start, is we're oftentimes swung quite rapidly on that bottom part of the pendulum. And then as we start to learn how to unify our understanding, we start to climb up the rope of that pendulum until we get to the very top. And we may sway a little bit, but we see everything as it is. And that's what Masonry is trying to do, is to get us to reintegrate all the different ideas and things that seem very fragmented into one understanding, and that one understanding, hopefully, if we've done it right, is in alignment with objective reality. So absolutely, Fatima, yin and yang are the measurement of the same thing. It's just going to be from perspective. And as we gain more and more awareness and elevate our consciousness, that perspective is going to become more and more one idea. Great question. Mr. Gibson, you have your hand raised, and then we'll move forward to Patrick. Yeah. JW?
Yes, how are you doing?
I'm good, thanks.
My question has to do with Gnosticism and the divine spark of humankind. From my readings, I understand that by reconciling our true identity as having divinity, once we're truly reconciled to that, it says that, the rule of gods or archons, will cease. Is the ruling of God in a way is necessary just because we have lost the touch of who we are?
Yes. It comes to the idea that the more you know about what is right, the less you can choose otherwise. Like if you truly, as you say, reconcile our understanding of where we've come from. Like I can say, yeah, I have a divine heritage, and then live a life like I don't have a divine heritage. Does that mean I really understand it? No. But the more and more that you truly have that gnosis, that true understanding, then you can reconcile it, and then you'll see that everything comes together. Excuse me.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, could you also give me some insight about the difference between the creator God and the higher God?
So you have the demiurge, which is Yaldabaoth, and then you have the true God, which is the creative, the actual creator. So the difference is that one's light and one's dark. So you have the true God, which is going to be in the realm of fullness, which is more like Plato's realm of forms, if you're familiar with Platonic ideas. But that's where all the spiritual world is, and that's where the aeons are, and that's where everything that is good exists. And then from a corrupted, act of Sophia falling from the realm of fullness, you see that you have this birth of this demiurge. And the demiurge is going to be ignorance. It's going to be fanaticism, ambition. It's malevolent. It thinks, and if you think of matter is pretty aggressive. Think about the formation of the universe, or think about how stars are, how they die. They explode matter and energy like crazy. Like it's very violent. So Yaldabaoth is going to represent the negative aspects. And the aeons, now that I say that, the aeons are emanations, or they are personifications of the true God. So Sophia was a personification of the wisdom of the true God. And so what you see is those are coming out of what the true God is. And when one fell, it became corrupted. And then from that became the corrupted creator who thinks that they create everything. And in Freemasonry, I would say it kind of ties back into the idea of there comes a point when when you first initiated, you're like, man, I don't know what's going on. I've never done this before, and you're kind of lost. Which is we all go through it. And there comes a point where you're like, I know what's going on, and I understand everything. And it's kind of like the Dunning-Kruger effect, where you think you know a lot, but you actually don't know anything. In alchemy, it's called the talk phase. So you have that moment where you think you are creating, and it's not. You're actually still creating something that's corrupted. So I hope that answers your question. Brother Patrick, you said you had a question.
Yes. So there's a question from YouTube, and then a few I've seen in the Zoom chat, but I'm sure Brother Benjamin will handle those. So from YouTube, someone asks if there's any talk or symbolism about hills or a hill in Gnosticism. They were referencing some telepathic literature, some study of telepathic people where they always ended up going to hills and communicating with each other.
I've never been asked that question. That's a good question. Not that I saw. And that, again, I am not a Gnostic expert, so don't take my word as like final. But no, I've not seen necessarily about hills and Gnosticism. In Freemasonry, we have a saying that Masonry works from the highest hills to the lowest valleys, meaning, you know, we work wherever we need to. There's no one spot that we won't go to help. That would be the only reference I have with hills. In regards to psychic ability, not that I know in Gnosticism. But again, by all means, look into that because I haven't seen that, but that doesn't mean I could be wrong.
Another person asks, how does ego play into all of this that you're describing?
That's a big question. How does ego play into all this? Now, it's tricky because I don't know, that's such a big question. I don't know which direction to hit it at. But I mean, if you look at it from like Jungian psychology, which Carl Jung is very influenced by Gnosticism. So it's not that the question is out of sorts because it is related. But the ego, if you take it from a Jungian perspective, is important because the ego is what's going to help hold the mask, the persona. It's going to hold your personality. And that is what we all see, right? But that's an illusion. Like everyone here we're all little screens and we only see a little bit. And that's what we think a person is. And that's not true. And maybe that's how we see ourselves. And that's not true. It's an illusion. So the ego, although it's important to help us interface with other egos and help us to create civilization and hold society together, it can be destructive if we don't know how to work with it. And so Gnostics don't necessarily talk about like the ego in the sense of modern day psychology because they don't have psychology as we know it today. They had something different. It was more spirituality. It was more trying to understand that what you are putting out to the world is an illusion and that the divine spark is the trueness of it. So the ego, again, I would say, if I were to extrapolate the two together and try to intersect them, the ego is where is a shield of the divine spark against materiality, but it's where materiality is going to impact the divine spark. So that's a really hard question because I think I can take it a couple different ways, but hopefully I answered your question. One more?
In the Zoom chat, we have 3 questions here. First is from Brother Chris. Is the idea that the world is corrupt and evil because of the demiurge's ignorance? Is there a goal to enlighten the demiurge?
I laugh because it's like, how do you enlighten a god? You know, we see him as a god and he sees himself as a god. He's not a god, he's a false god, but you know, how do you enlighten them? Yes, so when you create out of ignorance, you create corruption because you don't know what you're doing. And you know, the true God knows how to create because that is a part of his capability. He has full understanding. I say he just out of convention. Excuse me. But the demiurge, his creation is born out of ignorance, and from that is corruption. How do you inform a demiurge? That is beyond my pay grade. I do not know. But I think that every person that truly comes to understand their noble heritage, their divine origin, is going to detract from the demiurge and lessen that power in the Gnostic sense. Another question? We'll take 2 more and then we'll move on.
So Jennifer asks, how many aeons were created by the true God and what are their roles?
I don't know how many there were. I know when you look at a lot of literature, and this is not Gnostic, but there's usually 72 is usually the number I see a lot, like 72 names of God. You can, I'm sure, research that and come up pretty quick. But the capacity depends on what they were being the portrayal of. So if we take Sophia, she was an aeon. She was portraying wisdom. You got to define wisdom. Wisdom is different than knowledge. To me, wisdom is something more of applied knowledge with a spiritual understanding, if I could define it. Her goal was to be that face of what wisdom would look like. So depending on what the aeon represented, you know, fortitude, prudence, temperance, justice, whatever, that would be what their job was to do, was to live that particular principle. I would think of it if you could take Plato's realm of forms and make them celestial beings, archetypes, and make them celestial beings. That's kind of what an aeon is. One more question and we move forward.
Right. So the next question is from Freddie. Is Masonry worshiping the demiurge?
Does Masonry... No, we don't worship the demiurge, because if you know, and again, we're using Gnostic language, but if you know that there's a demiurge, then you know there's something higher. So you, in essence, can't worship the demiurge unless you choose to go into your base nature. And I would say, whether or not you would call the word worship, but if you choose to go into your base nature and just follow your instincts and ignore your spiritual needs, then I would say, yeah, I mean, anyone could be, technically worshiping the demiurge. But the minute you realize that, yes, this form isn't, and you can even say it's evil if that's what you believe, but I'm going to be master of it so that my spirit can do what it needs, that's the divine spark overruling the Yaldabaoth of your body, if you could phrase it like that. I don't know if you can, but that's how you would move away from it. So no, like we don't sit there and say, that's the demiurge, and yes, we worship it. We don't have that in Masonry at all. Good questions. All right, we're almost out of time, which is lovely. I love it when we are pressed. That means we're having good conversation and discussion. Moving forward, we're almost done. I want to get to that comparison, but to talk a little bit about, Jesus as an emissary. The thing is interesting about this is Gnostics on the whole believe that Jesus wasn't the Messiah. Now, there's a great book, and I've mentioned it before in the past. It's Zealot is the name, and I always forget the gentleman's name. It's somewhere here. Oh, look at that. Gnosis. It's not the book I was looking for, but there's a book on Gnosis. There's a book called Zealot that has been truly impactful because it looks at Jesus during the time of, putting aside of whether or not he was real. Again, just saying that he was real. If he was real, this is what it would look like. And you have to think about just the historical and social context of what the Jews were going through at the time when Jesus of Nazareth came into being and had this, according to, church literature, this, amazing, fantastical, mystical life and became the Messiah. That's Christian orthodoxy, the belief of Jesus being, depending on what you believe, whether or not he was divine, whether or not he's 3 in 1, there's a lot of different ideas around him, but that through him, we are all saved. The Gnostics diverge very far from that. Like I said, Gnosticism existed before Christianity came into birth, but it incorporated Jesus afterwards, and it incorporated more as an emissary, as a prophet or an apostle of, I don't want to say apostle, I want to say evangelist, someone who evangelizes the truth. But he was believed in Gnostic understanding to be someone who brought in an awakening, that through him, we were to understand how we can, or that we need to access hidden knowledge. So is he our road to salvation? Yes, because without him in Gnostic understanding, we wouldn't have that awareness. It's kind of like if you ever seen the really, it's pretty old now. What the bleep do we know? It's an old quantum mechanics, mystical kind of video, but there's a moment where they touch the head of someone and it creates this like understanding and awareness. And that's kind of how I envision Jesus as an emissary, and that's why I love this picture, is where he's imparting an awareness that what you see is not what is real. It is an illusion, and you need to go find more. So in Freemasonry, it's not that, again, if you go to Christian Freemasonry, then yes, they believe, Jesus is salvation. But in Universal Co-Masonry, Jesus is more like an emissary. It's like a world teacher, someone, and you can believe differently. You can believe he's the savior, and that, like, no one's going to say otherwise. But on the kind of the groundwork, everyone kind of consensus to the idea that he's a world teacher of some sort. Maybe go further and say he's a prophet or the divine, son of God. That's fine. But without him, we wouldn't have had a pivotal change in our global or consciousness as a whole. That's not in any like Masonic ritual that it says like verbatim. It is a underpinning that is there, that there's a lot of world teachers that have come to shift our awareness, Buddha being one and many others, that have come in to help humanity just kind of turn their perspective a little bit and adjust it a little bit to help us understand that there is a hidden knowledge. All right, I have 4 minutes to talk about the comparison of the two. There are many ways that Freemasonry and Gnosticism diverge. They don't agree, and that's what makes them unique from each other. I didn't choose to focus on that. I just chose to focus on how they were similar. Freemasonry believes in, I would not just say esoteric, which means for a small group, but occult and mystical knowledge. That there is knowledge that transcends what we were taught in everyday life. And that it is something that is experiential, that's something that we have to experience on our own. That's why initiations are not done over the internet. That's why initiations should not be done by proxy. That initiations and, you know, when you get into the next degree, those ceremonies are done by you and you alone. There are brothers who assist, obviously, to put the ritual on, but that going through the process of esoteric knowledge requires you to physically, spiritually, mentally be present. Both of these traditions, Freemasonry and Gnosticism, use myth, symbol, and allegory to help understand ideas and to help guide us into hidden knowledge. If we were just handed the truth, I don't know if our awareness would be able to digest it. I think about what I know now in Masonry versus what I knew back when I started, and I'm very grateful for the degree system because it helped allow, through the myths, symbols, and allegory, allowed my mind, both my spiritual mind and my physical mind, to align itself to better understand what those symbols, myths, and allegories were trying to tell me. There is a belief in the divine spark in Freemasonry, that everyone has the ability to have God within. It has God within. It's not even the ability. Again, there's a little bit of a variation with the Gnostics that only a few have it, or some have it. In Freemasonry, we believe all humans have it, and that's why they're worth saving. Like, we are very much pro-human. We're humanist in a lot of ways, that man can do it. We just need to work in the spirit over the matter. The need, again, there's that idea of descend, ascend, that we need to return to the source, the monad, to the great architect, to the true God, that we're working to go somewhere. For some reason, in the cosmic scheme of this drama that we've all been a part of, we had to fall from the monad. We had to fall from the true God into matter and be trapped in matter. And then through matter, that spirit had to exert itself and had to emulsify itself with matter in order to return. And why that is I think a very personal journey for every one of us to try to understand why we have to do that. But Gnosticism and Freemasonry have that understanding, a shared understanding. This is why when people talk, you know, when they're kind of neo-atheists and they're nihilists and they don't believe in anything outside of themselves and they don't believe in anything higher than themselves, this is why I would say don't be a Mason, because our rituals, you wouldn't fuse well with them, because you'd be like, I don't believe in returning to the source. I don't believe there is a source. So that would be one sticking point where, again, when I talk to inquirers, they'd be like, yeah, we may not be for you, because this is something that we do believe in. And we talk a lot about the great architect of the universe. We definitely believe in the power of initiation, both Gnostics and Masons. The idea that theurgy, again, that ceremonial magic, allows us to unlock our awareness and is a gateway to gnosis. You cannot have salvation in Gnosticism without gnosis. In Freemasonry, you cannot return to the source unless you combat the ignorance. And so the power of initiation is what marks someone aside and makes it so that their consciousness is elevated up and into something higher that allows them to unveil this illusionary world and let us see what's objectively behind it, both in the physical as well as in the spiritual understanding. And I want to close with a quote from the Gospel of Thomas, which is one of the books found in the Nag Hammadi find. And he said, whoever finds the meaning of these words will not taste death. And with that, I'd like to say thank you to everyone for coming out and being with us on the Masonic Seminar. We will be back next month. It is going to be on one of the other esoteric traditions. As I said, it will be on Hermeticism. And it will look somewhat similar to what we're talking about today. And we'll be looking at how Hermetics and where it comes from and why it's important in Freemasonry. If you have any questions, feel free to email me, or you can ask them on the platform that you're on, and the brothers here will assist you in that. We will be here for another 5-10 minutes if you want to stay on Zoom. That's for our Zoom people. If you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer that. Thank you for spending your night if you're coming from North America, and your morning if you're coming from the Philippines, or wherever you're coming from. Thank you for spending your time with us, and have a wonderful, wonderful week.